Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on the Firearms Amendment Bill tonight as well. And I rise to speak because getting firearms regulation right matters, and I believe this bill raises questions that we shouldn't ignore. Let me be clear what I'm not saying. I'm not arguing against firearms ownership in the Territory. I understand that station workers managing stock, farmers dealing with feral animals, recreational shooters, Indigenous Territorians who manage connection to country through hunting. There are so many real legitimate needs, and any sensible firearms framework must accommodate them. I've certainly got no interest in making life harder for people going about their lawful business in the bush. But I am interested in and I am committed to making sure that the laws we pass are the best they can be and do what it is that they're meant to do. That's what the Scrutiny Committee is there for, and that's exactly why we should listen to the Scrutiny Committee on this. And I thank the Chief Minister for responding to the recommendations of the committee, but I'm disappointed that she hasn't responded by accepting them. Madam Speaker, last week Commissioner Virginia Bell tabled the interim report of the Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion following the Bondi Beach massacre, in which 15 people, as we all know, were killed with weapons that were legally owned. That report calls for nationally consistent firearms regulation and a national gun buyback scheme. The Prime Minister has committed to the implementation of this. Across Australia, there's a serious conversation underway, and it's not a conversation about loosening oversight. Madam Speaker, we often talk about the NT being different. It is different, that's true. But the Territory is different cannot become an excuse to move in the opposite direction to a Royal Commission recommendation. So the question before us is not whether each provision of this bill can be defended in isolation. The question is whether this is the right bill for this moment. We've heard in this chamber that it's a missed opportunity for this Parliament in light of what's going on in Australia. Are we comfortable being the jurisdiction that extended licence periods and loosened renewal scrutiny in the same week as a Royal Commission told governments to tighten up? Because that's what this bill does. It extends corporate and employee firearm licences from 5 years to 10. When asked why, we talked about this both in the Scrutiny Committee, and I know in briefings the answer was simple. It came from the Saying Yes to Business report. And reducing red tape is absolutely a legitimate goal, but reducing the frequency of licence scrutiny is a public safety question, not a business convenience question. When we asked on the committee what evidence shows that longer licence periods do not increase risk, the answer was about administrative efficiency. That's not an answer to the safety question. It's a restatement of the commercial case. We should know what the evidence is, and we should know that this does not increase risk. The more serious issue is what happens at renewal. Under this bill, a licence continues in force beyond its expiry date while a renewal application is being processed, with no statutory timeframe on how long that can run. So a licence expires, an application is lodged, the unit is under pressure, applications are backed up, and the licence legally remains in force. For how long? Until the application is decided. When will that be? We don't know. The Northern Territory Police Force told the committee that statutory processing timeframes aren't suitable because processing depends on volume and operational availability, and I understand the operational reality. But the result is that licences can, in practice, run indefinitely once expired. That's not hypothetical, that's what this legislation creates. The committee recommended the 12-month review of processing times, which doesn't sound like it has been accepted by the government, but we recommended that so that we could get the information we need and actually find out what those processing times are. A review recommendation without any mechanism to act on its findings, however, is not a safeguard. It's an aspiration, and Territorians are entitled to expect more than aspirations when it comes to ensuring that our community is safe. We know in this chamber that everyone is committed to making sure that we have a safe community. Madam Speaker, Clause 11 increases the maximum penalty for altering a firearm from 4 years to 14. a more than threefold increase. And as we heard from the committee and from the Chief Minister, this doesn't appear in the rationale for this, or even reference to it doesn't appear in the explanatory statement. And I raise this not to relitigate the drafting process, but because it illustrates exactly why adequate time for scrutiny matters. Courts use explanatory statements. Practitioners use them. When something of this significance is missing, it undermines the integrity of the document and the process. The committee did recommend that it be corrected, and I believe it should be. So, Madam Speaker, I don't oppose this bill. Much of what it does is worth supporting, but I do ask the government for things. First of all, my request would be to implement the committee's recommendations in full. The committee has done their job as asked for by this chamber, and we have given you recommendations about what should happen to strengthen this bill. To ensure that the processing time review actually happens and that its findings carry weight, to correct the explanatory statement so that it's clear as time goes on exactly what this bill is intended to do and why, and come to this assembly with a clear account of how the Territory will respond to the Royal Commission's call for a nationally consistent firearms regulation. As I said, the Territory does have different needs to the southern capitals, but the Territory is different is often a phrase that does the work of ending conversations that should continue. It can't mean that administrative convenience substitutes for keeping our communities safe. We can recognise our unique circumstances here and we can still take public safety seriously. In fact, the Territorians who rely on firearms for their work and their way of life are best served by a framework that they can trust, one built on evidence, transparency and genuine scrutiny. And that's the standard we should be setting. That's the standard we should be setting in every piece of legislation that we pass in this House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.